Want to achieve network marketing success? Then you're in the right company. Hello, and welcome to Leave Nothing to Chance, hosted by networking marketing giant John Solleder. Learn everything you need to know about the network marketing space from somebody who's actually done it. Join us every week for front row seats as we feature some of the finest and most successful personalities in network marketing. Leave nothing to chance. Join us now.
Well, good day, everybody. It is already, wow, it's hard to believe that it is already December 14th and that Christmas is a short time away. New Year's is a short time away. So we're going to continue our series with Keith Hooper and Dr. Nancie Celini. And today we're going to talk about the art of listening. Hopefully everybody heard on the December 7th podcast about the art of communication. The art of listening. And you know, I'm going to look at my notes for a second here because I want to get this quote right. That when it comes to being a good listener, it's better to be interested than interesting. Interested than interesting. And I think I'll just kind of start the conversation and I'll throw it to Dr. Nancie and then to Keith for their thoughts on this. When I hear that, it makes so much sense because I know I am guilty, and you may be too if you're listening to this, of a lot of time either interrupting the other person when they're talking about their situation, or trying to give them a firsthand experience that's comparative to whatever they're going through. You know, for example, Nancie and I lost our mother here a couple of years ago. And, you know, a lot of you may have done that too. And if not, maybe in time, you know, unfortunately you will. And when somebody says, yeah, well, when my mother died, well, if your mother died 10 years ago, you're not in the moment. My favorite dog died about 3 weeks ago. We were in Florida. And our favorite dog, Banana, that some of you know, you've heard him bark many times. The UPS man and the FedEx man will not miss him. However, I miss him, and my wife and my kids miss him. And some of you miss him. I got to know him. He was a big, dopey dog, but we loved him. And, you know, in the moment when the dog died, you don't want to hear that somebody else's dog died. You just want somebody to listen and say, wow, that's really unfortunate, or, you know, whatever. And then, you know, shed light as they go. So that's part about being a good listener. And that's something I know I can certainly do better in the new year. So, Nancie, why don't we start with you? Everybody knows your background a little bit now, whether you want to come from a corporate standpoint and dealing with clients, or whether you want to come from a personal standpoint. I'll throw that to you. How do you become a better listener?
This is a topic near and dear to my heart, John. So thanks for having me back. And you're right. Last week we talked about communication, being a good communicator. So this is the opposite of that, right? Now I'm sitting on the other side, trying to hear what somebody's saying. And it's very interesting to me what you just described is actually explained through yoga philosophy. So I'd like to start coming at this from my yoga background. And forgive my voice, I'm just getting over a cold. Hopefully you can hear me well and you're listening. In yoga philosophy, there is a Sanskrit term. It is pronounced ashtaya. And it means to be non-stealing. So think about that, non-stealing. That's not really referring to the act of I'm going into your house and, you know, taking your wallet or your valuable art collection. Non-stealing means you're present in the presence of the person you're listening to. And you are never going to like for like them in their commentary. You're not going to try to put your own experience out there when someone is really bearing perhaps not their whole soul, but a little part of it. And especially in those scenarios that you described, when someone is grieving, when someone's just gone through a loss, you know, it is an awkward position. And we've all done it. This is no judgments, because that's also part of yoga. But when I found that concept years ago in my yoga philosophy studies, which is part of becoming a seasoned and experienced yoga teacher versus a yoga instructor, I'm the first one, want to believe I am. and very devoted to that. So understanding what is said about these human behaviors is fascinating to explore from that perspective. So this first concept of when you're listening, you're distracted by your own experience. And that's the human thing that's going on. Learning to not be distracted when someone says, I just lost my mom. I just lost my favorite pet. I just got fired from my job. Resisting that temptation, even if you've had the experience yesterday of saying, oh, I know how you feel. Well, that's also something we all say when we're trying to pay attention and listen. That's not really fair, because you really don't know how that person's feeling. So I want to just start this conversation today, which I think is highly important, by turning to 5,000 years of ancient wisdom that says in its codification, you should be non-stealing. And therefore, that concept of mindfulness, right? And being present in the moment that you just really laid out, John, in your opening remarks, is explained and is taught. And what is the number one skill for learning how to listen? It's learning how to be quiet. So a couple other things from my corporate world and from my martial arts training. You should have one mouth and two ears. And always remember that we humans tend to fall into the trap of having only two modes. We're either talking or we're waiting to talk. And that middle space that we should be taking up is something that's not taught. And unless someone calls it out to you, you may be unaware that you are really a poor listener. And usually when people try to call that out, it might be a husband or a wife, a spouse or a daughter or son. It can become an emotional thing. You never listened to me. Well, I think we'd all listen better if we had some training around it. So thanks for having this conversation. And those are my opening bids, Keith. Back to you, John.
Well, let's go to Keith. I know he's got something to say on this as well.
Well, I'm not as soft as Nancie. I'm a little more of an abrupt, business guy. Having been in business for myself since I was 19 years old. And you look at things. The podcast here, Leaving Nothing to Chance, is about building of businesses, relationships, and all the things that are there. And people do business with people they like. You like people who listen to you. People will like you if you're the person that listens to them. Okay. And I think that's, oftentimes in the business world, we have a message and we want to deliver that message, but the person may not be ready to hear that message. Okay. Or we may need to tweak that message a little bit, depending on who they are. But, from a business standpoint of where I'm at, is the best business decisions or the best business opportunities that ever came to me was when I listened, when somebody was sharing something with me, and buried in usually about 10 or 15 minutes was something that they were going to tell me that would make a difference. And it doesn't matter whether that was relating to the farming business or the export business or the trucking business or our network marketing business or whatever it happened to be, that when you're listening to somebody, there's a statement. If you listen to someone, they will tailor the presentation by telling you what they want to know to make a decision for whatever you're doing. That's one of the things that we got to look at. I think it was Professor Maltz, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to look that up, but I think it was Maltz that talked about that he did an experiment, and he got on a plane in Los Angeles and he flew to New York. And on the way to New York, the goal was to say nothing, but to listen to people, ask questions, get information from them. And then when they got to New York, that when the people got off the airplane that he had was seated with, there were teams from his group that interviewed those people. He then got back on the airplane, flew back from, I believe, New York, back to Los Angeles, and don't hold me that it's exact where he was flying to. But when he got back, the same scenario. So the idea was for him to find out as much about those people as possible by listening to what they had to say. And these people spoke 90% of the time was about whatever it was. But when the people were interviewed about whatever, they talked about that they'd just been on this airplane trip and they met the most interesting person. They met the most interesting person. Okay. They didn't know anything about Professor Maltz, Dr. Maltz. Okay. But he had listened to him. And I think that in our business, because once again, look, everything is business, whether you like it or not. It's one of those statements, whether you like it or not, everything is business. Look, when you got married, you sold your spouse on you. Okay. You're trying to sell your kids on something to do what you want them to do. Okay. If you're in business of other things, you know, whatever, you're interacting with people and you're wanting to communicate with them. And a big part of that communication is listening, because they'll tell you what they need to know to do business with you. They'll tell you what they need to do to go clean their room. They'll tell you what they need to do to interact and do these things. But so often we get in such a big hurry to tell whatever it is we're doing that we don't listen first. So, you know, if Stephen Covey, The 8th Habit, okay, listen, okay, and don't stop listening until that person stops talking. And most importantly, don't plan on what you're going to say. To Nancie's point, there is that people are talking and getting ready to talk. Don't get ready to talk. Listen. Let them tell you what about them. Let them tell you about their trip up the Amazon. You may have been there the week before and been there for a month, is a story that I share with. And somebody just went on a short trip. Maybe somebody went to Hawaii and they were telling you about the great trip to Hawaii. You may own a condominium in Hawaii. You may spend 6 months out of the year there, but you need to let them tell their story. And I think, John, you know, in the point of the business here and leaving nothing to chance is exactly that. Let them tell their story. Let you know who they are. And from there, then you can move to whatever point that you want to have. And I think that that's very, very important, John.
You know, a lot of great points and all of that. And if you think about whatever you're in, if you're listening to this show, you're probably in network marketing, you're either full-time or part-time, but you might be in something else, or you might, you know, be like a lot of our listeners, a lot of people in network marketing who have another source of income. Maybe you're in real estate, or maybe you're in another, business entirely that you own or you run, or you work for somebody else. But it's important to listen, because a lot of times opportunities are created by listening or overhearing other people's comments or conversation. You know, for example, now, you know, the last year and a half, you know, I don't need to tell any of you what's gone on in the world, right? You're living it like we all are. And if you listen, people will talk about a number of different things. And I brought this out on a call a few weeks ago, and one of the ladies I was with this weekend pointed out to me how beneficial she thought this particular call was, about the art of inviting. And in there, I talked about the fact that you have people talking about all sorts of things right now to do with their health. How many people have gained what used to be the freshman 15 when a kid went off to college is now the pandemic 15, or the COVID 15. Now, I don't know how you stay home and don't work out more. I've worked out more the last year and a half than I have since I was a young athlete personally, but a lot of people have gained weight. Plain and simple. You know, they've watched too much Netflix and too little, walking around the block with the dog, right? So they have. It's a fact of life. And a lot of people are talking about weight control. A lot of people are talking about their general health, their immune system, their immunity, their overall well-being. Gee, if there was a product. Well, if you ever heard a conversation like that, and you're in our business, no matter what company you're with, you probably have a product that fits what that individual is looking for. They're saying, I have a need. You have a solution. But if you're blah, 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 or you're looking on your cell phone at Facebook or on Instagram or something else, you may miss that person. What if that person's in the bank line behind you, or they're in front of you in the line at Starbucks talking to a friend? You can eavesdrop on someone's conversation, be polite about it. Say, oh, by the way, I overheard you mention something. Hey, I have a product that perhaps can help you. gee, how many people over the last 18 or so months have been concerned about their income or lack of income and saying, wow, I'm one of the lucky ones. I just saw this morning, I don't know what company it was, but there was a CEO yesterday, unfortunately, laid off 900 people by Zoom 2 weeks before Christmas. Don't know the company, not making any judgments, just saying, it was news. Keith and I have a mutual friend that unfortunately lost his job yesterday, that I spoke to last night. It happens, right? And it's going to continue to happen. And even in a good economy, people lose their jobs, right? Which means, what if you were listening and somebody expressed, hey, gee, I wish I had a way to make an extra 500, 1,000, 1,500 a month. It would have really come in handy during these last 18 months at different times. If you're listening and you hear that, even if they're a total stranger, can you go up and tap them on the shoulder and say, excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. I have a business maybe that you should look at. Can I spend 20 minutes telling you about it? Can I send you a video? Can I send you something? Can we get on Zoom? And you know what to do. You're network marketers, okay? But if you're not listening, you're never going to hear that other person express that need or desire that they have, where your opportunity can perhaps fill that void of something that they happen to be looking for. They're saying, hey, I need it. Their signs up. I need this. I need more money, or I need more health. But you're only going to hear it if you shut up long enough to allow yourself to hear it and then act on that opportunity. Nancie, let's go to you. How, respond to that?
I think so much is missed these days, John, to your point, not only about listening to the world that's going on around us, right? But tuning out some of the world that's going around us so we can hear what's important. And right now, we are living in, I think, one of the most distracted states that I've ever seen people in. Because we've been also tethered to our technology. It's nice to stand in a line at Starbucks, like with other humans, get your coffee, go, hi, how are you? And have a conversation. That's a little, it's getting to be more standard fare day to day here in the Northeast. But for a long time, that just wasn't happening at all. Instead, we've been tethered to our cell phones and our computers and our iPads, and really forced to work in this virtual way. And you've been on big meetings, you and Keith, you know what I'm going to say. When you have 50, 100, 200 people in a room, it's difficult to carry on one focused conversation. It can be even more challenging when you're in a remote setting, because you don't know what people are doing there, especially if they're not on camera. They're off camera. They've got you on mute, so you can't, they've got themselves on mute so they can hear you, but you can't hear them. And I think in those distractions, John, we lose so much. And I'll go back to the corporate side of this. I mentioned last week I was with Xerox, regarded as one of the best training universities for business professionals, more so than maybe their technology. And we discussed last week that was a missed message, but Xerox had, I think it was a 3-day course in effective listening skills. And I'll say it again, we teach so many things these days, right? And if you look at an average, curriculum for our high schoolers, say, they're getting a lot of stuff, but are they taught how to effectively sit down, listen to a conversation, jot down the notes, because I'm a note taker too, of what they heard, and then develop the ability to even say back to that person, hey, Keith, I listened to you describe your farming profession to me. I heard these 3 things. I just want to make sure I heard you right. Right? You said 1, you said 2, you said 3. That's that ability to close that loop on that conversation, and that communication between the art of listening, the art of feeding back, and then that art of confirming. So you remember the little diagrams, right? The sender of the message, the receiver of the message. I don't know if that's even still taught. Certainly, if you're going to go off into a profession, like speech pathology, you probably get a lot of that. But we don't teach these skills, which is why these conversations are so important. What I would make sure, and I do this with every single one of my grandchildren, because it's at least it's a little thing I can do to make a difference, right? They all want your attention. Kids are like that. If I'm busy doing something, and it's always inevitably when I've got the hot pot and I'm trying to get dinner on the table for 10 people, right? There's nothing wrong with saying lovingly, kindly, and in a business situation, it's a little differently. I don't have the space right now in my attention to really listen to you. And I want to listen to you. Can we have this conversation when, in the case of my grandkids, I'm done with dinner and we can sit down and you could tell me all about it. And children are amazing. They're very resilient. They don't take it as a personal affront, right? Sometimes we have to be careful with that in a business setting, but I also think we don't know when to say, no, I can't have this conversation right now because I can't effectively give you the time because I have all these other distractions. And the worst thing, and I hate this when it's done to me because it feels like a punch in the face. I'm having a meeting with someone, they've got their cell phone and this is all they're doing. Right. They're not listening to me. They're focused on that phone call. Now, could it be a phone call from their doctor, telling them whether or not, God forbid, they tested positive for some awful disease? It could be. I don't know. No judgments. But that's also a time as good listeners to be able to notice when the communicator is not giving you the time and that two-way process that has to happen, because I think we'd all agree this is a two-way commitment. So that person on the line who doesn't think you're a nut job and will talk to you in Starbucks, that's a beautiful thing. And I think, being cautious how we all approach other people's space, because that's the other thing I notice. People are very sensitive now because we're stressed. We're on overload here. But that's my take on it. But I think you made some really good points too, that sometimes the opportunity comes up for us to listen. Will we be ready and are we available? Can we make ourselves available to tune in and listen? Because if we don't, that may be an opportunity we're missing. So just want to make sure we know this is about relationships and being in agreement that this is a good time for me to listen to you. I don't think we set up those boundaries well enough either. It's my 2 cents.
Mr. Hooper.
Great. In fact, that was more than 2 cents worth. But, as we're talking about this listening for success, okay, is you have opportunity to listen. Okay. And there's a couple of things I want to cover. Number one is you're talking to somebody for the first time. You're listening to them, remembering that the person that's asking the questions controls the conversation. The person that's asking the question controls the conversation. It's not the person talking. It's the person asking the questions. So when you're meeting somebody first, second time, you don't know much about them, ask some questions, find out about them. What do they like? What do they don't like? What do they like about their job? What do they hate about their job? What do they like where they live? What don't they like about where they live? Okay. What are their, they'll tell you anything if you ask the questions. If you ask it caringly, they'll answer the question if you ask it in the context of generally caring. If you don't do it like you got them in a 1940s movie and they're sitting at a table and you got a light shining on them, and you're interrogating them. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a genuine interest. I bought some property in Idaho, and I was talking to some people that were neighbors we're going to be neighbors in the area, and I was visiting with them. Well, they gave me a couple of pieces of information that I was able to use to make a very good deal. Okay. that allowed me to do that because of a very good deal. I was thinking about it while we're here. How many of your listeners on the phone, how many of you remember a chain called Mervyn's? You remember the Mervyn department store chain? Sandra and I were having dinner in San Francisco, back when San Francisco was a place you wanted to go have dinner. And we were sitting in a restaurant and we were having dinner, and next to us were a group of 6 attorneys who were talking about how Mervyn's was going to go out of business. They were attorneys working for Mervyn's. And they were talking about all the stuff that was happening internally and how they were positioning the stuff and what was going to happen in a very short period of time. And being a nice guy sitting next to them at the next table, Sandra and I were, listening because they were speaking loud enough for us to hear them. Now, I'm not going to tell you what we did with that information, but when we did a little analysis of who they were, which we were able to do as they did something, and we were able to interact with them a little bit to find out a little bit about who they were. They had no, as whatever, we were able to take that information and just use it to our advantage, shall we say. Okay. But it was that listing process. It's also when you come to, we had an opportunity because of listing that there was a situation where someone had passed away. And we were talking as a family, and this was an acquaintance that we had known for many years, and it was a family situation. And guess what? They wanted to dispose of a condominium complex. Okay, they wanted to dispose of it quickly. Okay, we didn't make we didn't gouge them on the pricing or whatever, but nobody else even had the opportunity to buy it. Because the question later on was, how were you able to get that property? Because we listened. Okay. And you have that in so many things in life, not just in network marketing, but with all kinds of other opportunities will present themselves if you listen. But if you're talking, you're not listening. Okay. Most of the information, guess what? I think Nancie can speak to this. Most of the information that you're going to receive came to you when you were listening, not talking. So really smart people listen. And so that, I think, is just so important, but it applies to so many things in our lives called listening for success. And if you're in the direct sales industry, which is what we're talking about here, okay, when you meet that person the first time, I play a game. I want to know absolutely as much about them as possible, and for them to know little to nothing about me. I take the Dr. Maltz approach. Okay, know as much about them. Because, Sandra always, we have conversations. She goes, why would people tell you those things? Okay. And I said, because I asked. Okay. And that empowers you when you're building your business. People do business with people they like and trust. People do business with people that care about them. The statement was, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's only going to come through by listening, John.
Well, these are great points. Let me throw something else out here. I'm going to look at my notes. I'm not being distracted. I'm looking at my notes.
And yeah, we'll let him get away with that this time, Nancie.
This time. No, I actually use 2 computers when I do these calls because I'll be honest with you, I forget things, and I think that this is relevant. So let me throw this at you guys. There's 6.4 billion people worldwide who use a smartphone. On average, each of these users spends 3 hours and 43 minutes a day on it. And, whether they're looking at Facebook or Instagram or texting or actually speaking, it's amazing. I was talking to one of our young distributors over the weekend, and he had his phone in his hand. He's 24. And I said, John, you can actually make phone calls on that thing, and he looked at me funny because that age, they don't make phone calls. They don't realize that thing you can actually pick it up, dial some numbers, and somebody else might pick it up and talk to you. It's amazing. But along those lines, and I'm not slamming cell phones. I use mine constantly, and I'm on Facebook constantly, and I'm a Facebook junkie. I admit it. I love Facebook. Some people hate it. I love it. I don't know why. I just think it's kind of interesting to see what people are up to. But it's a distraction. And here's where I'm going with that. Here we are able to better communicate electronically than we've ever been because of those phones. right? We can do all sorts of things. We can talk to people in another country for free on WhatsApp. We can do all these remarkable things. And yet, I feel more distant from most human beings than I ever have. More alienated, if you will. Now, I'm not alienated. I was just with 1,000 people over the weekend at a meeting. So I'm not alienated. Obviously, I have people around. But because everybody's first inclination is be on that phone, be on that phone. The guy sitting next to you, you might know him 20 years, but he's on his phone the whole time. How do we get back to some basic communication? Now, one thing I'm doing is I can't take a whole day doing it just because of the nature of the business that we are in, but I'm taking some periods of time every day where I'm just leaving the phone plugged in the wall. And I don't care who calls me. Okay. I don't care if it's business. I don't care if it's personal. Now if I'm waiting for a call from a doctor's office, if I'm waiting for a call from a new distributor or something, of course, I know that call's coming. I'm going to be looking for it. But otherwise, I'm just disconnecting from the darn thing for a few hours at a time. And I find, number one, I'm getting actual work done in my office here where I'm interviewing you guys today. I actually can come in here and I can actually do some work if I don't have the phone with me because nobody's bothering me. I can actually put my head down, and whether it's something I have to read, something I have to write, something I have to communicate with somebody else on, I can actually get some productive work done. I can actually read a book and learn more, okay, by plugging it into the wall for a few hours. And oh, by the way, I found so far since I plugged it in the wall that nobody's died because I didn't call them back within an hour or two, which is remarkable. So how do we get back to that where we're listening a little bit more to another human being's needs, wants, aspirations, and a little bit less to what they had for dinner tonight that they posted on Facebook or Instagram? How do we do that effectively? How do we get that discipline, I guess, is where I'm going with that, to do that, to put the thing down and just say, let's listen. Whether it's and let me frame the question this way. Whether that's with your kids, you both have kids, you both have adult kids, you both have grandkids some are becoming adults, probably have cell phones already, okay? Or whether it's in a business climate where, to one of your point a few minutes ago, they're looking at their phone, they're not listening to you, okay? Their brain's going on that, then it's coming back to you, then it's going that, and they got half of what you said, okay? God forbid you're giving them instructions how to take their medication or something, So anyway, let me throw that question at you both. Keith, let's start with you this time.
Well, John, as you're talking about that, I think we've fallen into some kind of a pit, and I believe it to be a pit, that we think we need to communicate with everybody. Okay, we need to go on Facebook. We need to have 4,500 friends on Facebook. We need to be able to send texts out to this or that, okay, to hundreds of people. Okay, there was even a time when people actually used email. Okay, that was back in the Stone Age, Fred Flintstone time, but people communicated that way. But what we're talking about on the, leaving nothing to success, we're talking about chance. Okay, leaving nothing to chance to success. Okay, we're talking about actually communications. We're talking about that, and when we think about success, okay, success is really going to circulate somewhere between 6, 8, maybe 10 people that you're going to be communicating with that are in that circle, okay, where you're going to of success that's going to lead you to success. If you're in network marketing, if you're in the real estate business, if you're in the agricultural business, if you're in the trucking business, if you're in all these things, whatever it is, there's going to only be a core of a handful of people in each one of those industries that you're going to tap into. And it's that art of listening is we're talking about is who are you listening to, okay? And that's key, okay, to success is who are you listening to, okay? If you're in the trucking industry, which we were that was part of one of our businesses, we only had like 8 or 10 trucks. We had 10, okay, long haul trucks that we used. But I wasn't really interested in gleaning the information from somebody else that had 10 trucks. I was very interested in gleaning information from the guy that I knew that had 500 trucks. Okay. And he had a very interesting business. His name was Opie Wallace. He was out of Planada, California, and his business card said Opie Wallace. That's all it said. Opie Wallace, Planada, California. No business number, no address, no phone number. There wasn't anything else on this man's business card. Okay, just his name and where he lived. Okay, where his trucking company was at. Okay, but Opie obviously built. I mean, this guy came to California in the 1930s. Okay, he was part of the transition that you hear about. Coming from Oklahoma to California with nothing. Okay, and he was owned one of the largest trucking companies in California, if not the largest. Okay, but once again, I cared about what Opie had to say. Okay, I cared about that information. So I think so often we're concerned that we need to listen to all of these people. Well, here's what it is. Most of those people are not going to give you the information you need to move forward. So what are you looking to accomplish? Okay, in whatever the business is or whatever the relationship is, to Nancie's point, okay, if you're working on your relationship, okay, and you're looking for advice on relationship, who are you listening to? Somebody else that's got a terrible relationship with all the family and kids and whatever, nobody talks to them, and you're listening to them for advice? Not who I want to listen to. Okay, if you're in business and you're in the real estate business, for example, like my friend in Nevada, okay, owns a very large, John knows him, owns a very large real estate company. Okay, he doesn't advertise. He does not advertise. He's got 40 or 50 agents working for him. They sell hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate every year, and they do it all from referrals. All from referrals. They don't do any advertising, okay, other than a yard sign so that they know the property's for sale or whatever, whatever they call those things. I don't think they call them yard signs anymore in the real estate world. But he does everything from referrals because his agents listen to the people that are buying and the people that are selling, because you got to remember, generally, if somebody's selling something, they're also going to be looking to buy something. And people that are buying something are also going to know people that are looking to sell something of whatever that scenario is. And they do that all through that relationship. But it's a small group of people. I think too often we're too concerned about, selling hula hoops, okay, to the masses, which is great, but that's not most of us, that's not our business. Okay, our business is about a group of key people, and listening to that group of key people in any area of our lives that we're trying to get better in. It's around a handful of people, listening to those and making sure they're the right people. Okay, this is where that asking the questions. Okay, asking the questions. I was listening to a guy yesterday talking about. I'm not even going to go there, but I am going to go there. The guy was concerned about a particular point, and a friend of his says, "Well, I found my advisor." Well, the advisor happened to be a person with a lot of credentials, okay? But when you dug into it, they didn't have much success, okay? They didn't have a lot of success. Well, that's not who you want. So once again, spend the time to listen, ask the questions, who are you listening to, and understand for success in life, a handful of people are going to be your mentors and advisors. I think I can't remember the book, John. You probably do, being much younger and smarter than I am, as you always remind me. And I think it was Milton Hershey that was talking about, there was a group of people where they sat around and they had dinner once a month, and there was 6 or 8 or 10 people, guys, okay, men at the time, businessmen. And they were all in different types of business, but they listened to each other because they could glean that information. So, who are you listening to is very, very important. Nancie touched upon it, and I think it's very, very important that people you're listening to, are they worthy of you taking the time to listen to them? Ask some questions to find out, John.
Mm-hmm. Nancie?
So going back to this thought, John, because I think it's two-sided. What can we do to be better listeners? And what can we do to set up the environment for our communicator? Because again, this is really important. And Keith, you used the word relationship. Good communication is fostering a good relationship right from the moment, whether you know that person for 10 years or you're meeting them for the first time. So the personal responsibility that I have in becoming a good, active participant who's engaged engaged in listening to what's being said. It is a skill. It really is a skill. I think there's an art side, but there's a skill side, and not everybody has it. And it's some of the things I mentioned earlier. And the one thing I didn't mention earlier that I will toss out, because it can be our evil twin sometimes, and that's our ego. You know that expression, so you got to leave your ego at the front door. When you're going in to have a conversation, to Keith's point, asking good questions, being humble. If you're there to get information and listen to someone, they probably don't want to hear your background unless it's an interview, right? That's a little different. So I think ego, and the other word I want to toss out here about developing this as a skill, and we don't talk about it enough, is the art of compassion. And that doesn't mean that every single conversation I'm engaged in, I'm hearing something horrific and awful. Compassion should be much more accessible to us. And it goes like this. I'm a human, you're a human. We're all made of flesh and blood and bones. And I've come here today to listen to you. I'm going to also listen to you with compassion, because maybe some of the things they're going to say are really getting close to a very personal nature with me. And listening for that is really important. How many times have you been asked, how are you? And we lie, I'm fine. How many times have you heard someone, how are you? I'm fine. And they're not. So compassion goes a long way. I don't care whether you're in a business setting, you're at Sunday church meeting, PTA, doesn't matter. Having compassion, really important. And how do we develop these things? We have to practice listening. And one of the strongest things that I do for myself is I practice the art of meditation. Because one of the most compelling, resonating spaces for me these days, having learned how to accept it, is silence. It's really a powerful space. Why do we feel like we have to be like water with our words and fill every single moment? We don't. Keith and I just are having a serious conversation. He just told me something that is really personal and really powerful. I can sit with that for a moment. I can look at him. I can make eye contact. I can say, I hear you. How often do we really practice that? We don't, because we're too busy saying, how are you? I'm going to say, I'm fine. They're going to say, how are you? I'm going to say, I'm fine. And you're on to the next thing. Practicing that silent void. And you can practice it in meditation. I'm going to go out on a limb here, John, but I'm going to assume your audience will forgive me for it. But, I'm very open about my faith. I learned from someone very dear to me that prayer was when we talk to the Almighty. Meditation is when we shut up and we listen. Mm-hmm. So for people who think meditation is some mystical guru cave thing that came from India, the practice was developed, I will tell you, so that people could sit in contemplation, mindful contemplation, to listen to the universe and to listen for the Almighty. Now you tell me how powerful that skill would be, because that voice, I think, is hidden in a lot of things. It's hidden in the things that people say. There's the compassion, right? Hearing someone, hearing that personal experience, just being able to look them in the eye, and listening is you're engaged, you're watching, you're listening. You're on occasion saying, yes, I hear you. So that's what I do personally. The other side of this, I'm going to give you this real quickly. Knowing that someone's super busy and you're going to rent space in their brain for, 15 minutes, means that you have to do your homework and your preparation. So if I'm meeting with a business executive who I know is super busy, they've got 1,000 things on their mind, I'm probably prepping for that meeting, be it 15, 20 minutes, harder than I would prep to give a 1-hour presentation at a 1,000-person conference. Why? Because I've got to get in, and to Keith's point, I've got to ask the right question to open the door. And then I have to shut up and listen. I also have to set them up a bit in a good way by saying, so-and-so, whatever their name is, I know you're really busy. You're giving me your time today means so much to me. I only need 15 minutes of your time. The conversation we're going to have, and this ties back to our communication skills, right? I'm going to discuss A, B, and C, and maybe in a 15-minute conversation, it's, I'm here to tell you about one thing. Tell the person who you're going to listen to what you need from them. Because we also don't set up people for success in the opposite way. So those are my two perspectives, what I can do to become a better listener. And I think I've given you some things to think about. Not everybody's going to do them. Not everybody practices yoga, but I think everybody practices some form of faith following, whatever that is. And I'm going to tell you, every single faith I know of has that concept of learning how to be quiet and listen. It's so important. And the more you practice it, 3 minutes a day, the better and better you get at it. So hopefully I've given you some tactical ideas.
Don't go anywhere yet. We're almost done, but I got a couple other things here. So indulge us a few more minutes, audience, because I think you're gonna like this. Okay, so let me throw out a couple things, because I was making notes as both of you were talking, as I know both of you so well, obviously. Let me say this: listening creates opportunity. So for those of you who are really listening to the podcast while you're driving, pull over and write that down. Don't try to do it while you're driving, by the way. Pull over first, okay? If you're listening at home, write that down. Listening creates opportunity. Now, I'm going to give you some, and Keith, I don't know if you can or cannot comment. I'll ask this question of you generically, and you tell whether you can comment or not. But you mentioned our friend who's a realtor. It's really your friend. I know him through you. Very, very, very successful. And I know the company he's with is one of the largest in the world, most famous in the world. Everybody on the call would know it if you mentioned it. So I don't know if you're comfortable mentioning it. But because he heard of an opportunity where the parent company hadn't acted on their own name, I think he did something with that name that has benefited him to this day. So if you just hold that thought for a minute, okay, and we're going to come back to that. I worked with a guy who now owns a network marketing company on it when I was doing consulting work in the industry a number of years ago. And this gentleman shared with me that his uncle had helped to actually started a company selling clocks door to door over in Scotland back at the turn of the last century, I believe it was. And out of that, a lot of people said, boy, we love the clock, but we don't have the money to buy the clock. Now, at that time, you didn't have credit cards. So he went to the bank and he created commercial paper so that people could sign their life away and basically put down the equivalent of about $1 or £1 at that time and buy the clock. And I don't know if it was let's just say it was £5. They owed the rest to the bank and they paid it with the interest and they got the clock. So they got up for work on time or school on time. Opportunity by listening. In other words, the customer was saying, I really want that, but I can't buy that because what did he do? He heard them well enough that he said, let me go down and fix the problem so that you can get the clock. Okay. And created the largest mail order company in the world long-term as a result of that. Way back, I was a member of the $1 Million Roundtable. I don't even know if that still exists today. I'm sure some version does. $1 million is probably not a big deal in life insurance these days. I mentioned Joe Gandolfo selling billions on the last call we did, and others. But the whole idea of the $1 Million Roundtable was you sat down with colleagues in your industry. They did the same thing you did. They knocked on the same doors you knocked on. They basically sold the same product you sold. But you had a couple of guys in every area of the country that were incredibly successful. You had a bunch of other guys who were doing okay, and you had a bunch of other guys who were doing nothing. Okay, well, they weren't at those meetings. Okay, the guys who were doing stuff were at those meetings, interestingly enough. But when we would go to those MDRT meetings, people would share some of what they were doing. Well, if you were sitting there looking on your cell phone, and a guy like Mehdi Fakazadi, who was one of my mentors in the life insurance business, real name, he's a Persian gentleman, okay? But when Mehdi Fakazadi talked, you listened, okay? When Joe Gandolfo talked, you listened. When Ben Feldman talked, you listened. And any other productive person, you listened. Because what they shared with you, they weren't sharing for you. They were sharing their experience. You took their experience and you applied it in your business, and all of a sudden you sold more. You closed a sale perhaps that you didn't with one of the strategies that they gave. You weren't going to get that if you did not listen. Okay. And I'll give you one more here. Keith mentioned rightly so Dale Carnegie last week, the great Dale Carnegie courses that I've taught so many people. And it's funny because I was listening when Keith said that. And my son, Nancie's nephew, Fred, about to be 18 here this month, which really makes me feel old. But Fredo is coming to me on a daily basis now and saying, Dad, I need to learn how to make money. Where do I start? And we're in the middle of a million different things going on. And we spend 5 minutes together here and there. But I said, after Keith said that, I'm going to get him in a Dale Carnegie course. Second hockey season's over in February. I'm going to put him in a Dale Carnegie course. Why? I'm his dad. Whatever I say, he's only going to half listen or be looking on his phone. But I will ask him to leave his phone in the car, and I'll go to the Dale Carnegie course with him if need be. So he can hear some other people once again. By listening, all of a sudden, something happens up here in this gray matter, and all of a sudden you go, that's a great idea. Let me use that here. Let me use that there, be it in my business, be it in my personal life. Same with hopefully all of you listening. So let me throw this first. Nancie, we'll go ladies first on this. If you can think about this for a second. Was there a time that you listened and heard something that turned into an opportunity that you capitalized, being in business, personally, whatever you want to share? Keith, same question for you when Nancie's done.
Absolutely. And it had to do with my transition, John. You probably remember I was running really a technology training company for the better part of decade and a half. And it was in listening to what people really needed out of that training that launched me into my whole organizational change management career. And it was just huge. Not that I ever abandoned my roots. I'm still a teacher. I consider myself a teacher, value that tremendously, but it was in understanding what people felt they weren't necessarily getting from just going and sitting in a training class alone. There's more. And I wanted to be the more. I wanted to bring alongside of it, training and education, therefore, is a really huge component of organizational change management, think OCM. But it's not, we just can't educate people and expect change to happen. So that was a really important transposition. I'm glad I listened, just like I didn't listen to the people who told me to not go into the computer industry when I was first got the offer from Xerox. So there's, hopefully that's a good example of opportunity.
And to the same thing, John, when 25 years ago, a friend who I call a friend and wanted to share something with me. And I wasn't looking. I didn't want to look. I was busy. I had a lot of other things going on at the time. But because they were a friend, and I went and I, quote unquote, listened. And from listening, it has made a huge difference in our lives and, literally thousands of other people because we listened. And I think that is so important. The other thing that I think is important is most of us with our listening skills have developed them to the point that we listen to people with tragedy. It's almost like misery loves company. And that's where we want to listen to people. We only want to listen to people when if it's a tragedy situation or a stressful situation or whatever, we seem to listen. But we don't seem to listen well celebrating their success. When they're when something went well, when things are going good and they want to share that. We don't seem to listen well to that. Okay. And I think that really, for me personally, that's when I've gotten the most of those relationships and everything else, is when things were going well. Okay. It's good to know the things that don't work are gone bad, so you don't have to replicate it, but it's just as good, as important or more so, as to what people are doing well. So I think that's important. I want to encourage everybody, back up a couple of minutes to the previous segment with Nancie. Listen to that again. Take some good notes with that part that she covered. Okay, about listening. As a farmer, as Nancie was talking about that communication. One of the things that you notice with farmers, and it doesn't matter whether they're your local farmer or your gardener or somebody that farms thousands of acres. You'll see a farmer, and the comment is always made: a farmer walks the fields. Okay, and so you would have a field of crop, whatever it was, didn't matter what it was, and you would get out and you would walk the field. Well, you weren't just looking; you were listening as to what that field was, what those crops were telling you, what those plants. If you got house plants, they're trying to talk to you. They're trying to communicate with you. Okay, but you want to listen. That listening concept. Okay, so once again, this listening is so much and so important and touches in so many things. Just like my friend in Las Vegas, he listened because a friend of his had a business. And they had known him they've been friends for a number of years. And when Gene took over the Sotheby's real estate agency in Las Vegas, and he called his friend and he says, "I need an 800 number." Okay. And Gene says, okay. So about 2 hours later, the gentleman calls him back and he says, "Gene, I found a number for you. It's $2,500 to buy the number." And Gene says, $2,500 for the number? And he goes, "Yeah, it's $2,500 if you want this number." And Gene says, "What is it?" He goes, "I'm not telling you, but it's $2,500. And here's the point. If you don't want it after you buy it, I'll buy it from you for the $2,500. So my friend's real estate office in Las Vegas, Nevada is 1-800-Sotheby's. Sotheby's had not taken that number. When he ran the first newspaper ad or business card that he was doing back when he first took it over. And, so when you see his signs, it's 1-800-Sotheby's. Well, 1-800-Sotheby's rings into his office in Las Vegas, Nevada. So when you dial 1-800-Sotheby's out of New York, okay, it rings into his office. He refers that caller to another Sotheby's office in Las Vegas, and he gets paid 1% of the sale because it came through his office, 1-800-Sotheby's. So once again, there's a lot of things that are out there, but you got to be open. You got to be listening. You got to be listening for success. You got to not just, not to the point where, misery loves company and we're just only listening to people because things are terrible. Listen to the people that are having success. Listen to the people that are joyful, that things are going on. They've got things that are to share with you that are probably going to be much more impactful to your life, John.
Well, and see that this is a great place for us to kind of wrap up. What opportunities are you missing by not being a good listener? I know I'm going to be listening better in 2022. Okay, because sometimes I don't hear because I love to talk. Okay, anthropologically, men, we don't talk as much as women. Women use 7,000 words a day. Men supposedly use 2,000, but I got things mixed up somewhere along the line. I'm about 8,000 words for a guy. I love to talk. Made me very successful. I tell my wife all the time when she said, "If you just shut up and listen, when I stop talking, you stop eating." On the other hand, what am I missing? Think of that opportunity, whether it was the clockmaker in Scotland, whether it was Keith's buddy Gene in Vegas, okay? What opportunities are you costing yourself by not listening? And if you're in our industry, direct selling, there are a lot of people looking for what you have. But if you're too busy with verbal garbage, blah, 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 or you're too busy looking at your cell phone, you're not paying attention to that human being. And that human being wants your attention and warrants it. Like Nancie said about renting 15 minutes of space in that person's brain For you to get that, they got to feel like you want to have a relationship with them. You want to communicate with them. Very difficult to do. So in wrapping up, first of all, let me thank both of my guests, Dr. Celini and Keith Hooper. And what are we going to be doing after this, right? Because now we're really getting into the Christmas season. I know most of you celebrate. Some people don't. If you do, of course, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa. Did I miss anything? Any other holidays this month? Happy birthday for those of you with birthdays this month. So really interesting. As some of you know, I have a background in teaching people about debt reduction. I may have been the innovator of that network marketing. In 1991, I started teaching a course on it in Canada on people on reducing debt. I brought that down here to Dallas. A company that I worked with used it to their advantage and became a very large company. A lot of other people took credit for my work, frankly. It doesn't really matter. What's important is people benefited from the work that we all did on it. But I'm going to be teaching some concepts. Keith, I'm going to ask you to interview me. I'll write the questions and you interview me on it. So we'll have that podcast up on debt December 21st. I think it's really important, folks, going into the new year. I'm not Dave Ramsey. Dave's really, really good at what he does. He studies it a lot more than I do. But for our industry, I can give you some basic fundamental things that you can start in 2022 to retire some debt so you don't come out of 2022 maybe like coming out of 2021. Then on the 28th, wow, and this is, Nancie doesn't know this and neither does Keith, but our good friend Joe Garcia. Joe is the top earner of his company, long-term industry leader, legend, icon, great human being as well. Joe has volunteered to go through a free book that he has, an ebook on the manifestation of your dreams. And I'm going to be interviewing Joe on that book and on his work. And that's the perfect segue going into a new year. And that'll be up on the 28th of December as another live podcast here to finish out the year. Really looking forward to both of these. But Joe's going to help you to set your goals for 2022. How did we get to 20? Wasn't it like New Year's Eve 2000? We were worried about the computers not working, and here we are, right? 22. Yeah, wow. Well, it seems like yesterday, right? They scared us on that one. Anyway, some people are too young to remember that, but we all do, certainly. But I want to thank both of you once again. These interviews have been great. We've been getting some great feedback. I was at an event over the weekend, and a lot of people are listening. And honestly, a lot of people listen, and I don't even know that they listen until they tell me that they listen, that they're a fan of the show. So we're going to keep this going through 2022. We're going to give people as much content as we can on network marketing, but on other skills, because network marketing is a microcosm of the macrocosm of your life. Okay. What you do in network marketing is what you do with your kids. It's what you do with your neighbors. It's what you do with other parents at the Little League field or the PTA. Okay. So these are important skill sets that we're hopefully helping you to develop, and we just look forward. So December 21st on debt. I'm sure you're going to want to listen to that, especially at Christmas, as your credit cards will probably be a little higher than normal. And then, of course, the manifestation of your dreams for 2022 with the great Joe Garcia. And it's going to be a great year coming up, folks. It's going to be the best year ever. So thank you for your time. Thank you both. Thank you all listening at home.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Leave Nothing to Chance. If you want to know more about what it takes to succeed in the network marketing space, join us again next week for another amazing episode. For additional resources and to connect with John Solleder, visit leavingnothingtochance.com. Don't forget to leave a review, and we'll see you next time.